Kia ora, I'm Ian Harvey, founder of Collective Intelligence, and this is Stuff That Matters Now. Now my hoki mai. Today I am in a conversation with a really interesting Englishman, Iain Menmuir, who is now living down Dunedin, and I'm really interested to delve into his life as a somebody who has dyslexia. I was going to say suffering from dyslexia. He's not suffering from dyslexia. He is thriving with dyslexia, and I'm really interested in his journey and what that has, how that's evolved, and how it's made Iain the person he is today. So he's had a very interesting life and journey. So really interested to jump in and into the world of dyslexia and how it shows up as an adult. Enjoy. Kia ora team, welcome back. It is a beautiful winter's morning and I'm talking to Iain Menmuir in downtown Wellington. He's laughing. Why are you laughing at me? Oh, fuck, this is going to be tricky. Be nice. Okay, say something.
Yep, you're just cracking me up.
Oh, okay, all right. Yeah. Well, I'm trying to be serious, so
okay.
There you go. This is not a comedy show. This is very serious, all right? And we are in, that's the problem. We're in Wellington, and it is a beautiful winter's morning. It was -3 degrees when I left this morning, and not a cloud in the sky. And I've driven down to Wellington. We've got some stuff to do, Iain and I, which I'm really looking forward to. So, Iain, good morning.
Good morning, Hov.
Thank you for agreeing to this.
Yeah, my pleasure.
We've got a focus. We're not for today, which I've been intrigued meeting Iain via B-Lab. We were interviewed via Melbourne and through Mindy Lau, and I was very just one of those random things. And we've started to do some work together, which I'm really excited about. Yeah. So Iain, tell me about the accent. Where's that from?
The accent, all over the place. UK. I've lived in a lot of different countries. Whatever edge of accents I had, I think, has been kind of knocked off. Part of that was first in New Zealand back in early 90s. My mum was insistent on me not getting a Kiwi accent back then, which I clearly haven't. And who knows what happens this time.
Right. And so where were you born?
I was born in England, but don't tell anyone.
Right, okay. And what has brought you to New Zealand?
Nat's, excuse me, Nat's my partner and I, we were living in the French Alps for the last 5-6 years, up until 2021. Loved France, didn't want to go back to the UK. Nat's was commuting between the UK and Chamonix in France. And we realised we'd never get away from that commute. And so we kind of sat down on, December the 29th, 2020, got a big board out and did all our ideation about what is it that we want, where might that be, and Canada and New Zealand came up. And really psychologically, Nats wanted Canada, so we started looking into that, and it's incredibly complex. And then my sister said to me, being half Aussie, so I can just come to New Zealand, she said to me, so you've chosen the harder of the two options for what reason? And that kind of made the penny drop, because Nats's qualifications were recognised more easily in New Zealand. I can just come here. It was the middle of COVID. And then it all happened from, that was kind of January, February, applied for visas, and we were on a plane. Nat's had a job. I had some work. We're on a plane 3 months later to New Zealand.
What date's that?
We left the UK 23rd of July, 2021. So within 5 months, 6 months, we made the decision, considered one country, changed that, and arrived in another country with jobs in the middle of COVID, you've got to make shit happen, right?
And you got through the whole system that we
Yep.
had,
Yep.
and you got through it.
Yeah. And though both immigration and MIQ were awesome. The people there's a lot of bad press about these guys. And I spoke a lot to two guys at immigration, and then another guy really helped us with MIQ. In part, we were kind of an easy tick, Australian citizen, critical health worker. But obviously there were constraints, even citizens couldn't get back, which is a real shame. But what I found was by speaking to them, understanding what they actually needed from us, then it made their lives easier. And the same with MIQ. We got an emergency allocation, and it was tenuous, but by speaking to them and figuring out, and they helped us and guided us. And all the bad press about them, I think, I had a very different experience.
Nice to hear.
Yeah.
Nice to
important, I think. Important to call that out.
Yeah, nice to hear, because I've often thought that must have been just a really, really bloody tough job at times for those people.
Yeah, and I think that it actually comes into what we might lead on to is clarity and simplicity are two things that are big threads for me. And common understanding is the foundation of that. Your interpretation of what everyone read on websites and the news is one thing, but until you actually speak to them and say, that's what you mean, then you can make shit happen.
Okay, so let's just cut straight to that. So this is the thing that you want to flesh out today. Those two things.
They're the two things that are really important to me. Clarity and simplicity.
Why? Tell me about that.
Where do I start? I suppose the roots of why they're important to me go back from when I was really young. I was fortunate in some respects, but abandoned in a lot of respects of being diagnosed dyslexic at about 7 or 8 years old. So back in the late 70s, early 80s. So that was really unusual. What's not really changed, or it's changed a little bit between then and now, is we understand what dyslexia is. I was just the thick kid in the corner, completely misunderstood. The challenges of a lot of neurodiverse people, they tend to be very articulate, but they can't transfer that down on paper. And as your vocabulary is expanding when you're a kid, it's all jumbled up. So as that progressed through my school life, I was rubbish, absolutely rubbish. I was called all sorts of things, which makes you pretty resilient and also not frightened of failure, because in the traditional eyes, you've failed all the time. So you've bounced back every time.
Just why were you where was the education? In the UK then?
Yeah, in the UK, yeah.
Why were you diagnosed as dyslexic? Was there were you taken aside and go, let's have a look at this dumb kid, or was it a blanket test?
No, it was very specific to me. I was feigning illness all the time, running away from Latin classes. I was miserable. I was very disruptive. My parents, I don't know what my parents ever thought, despite having asked them. They both gave me different answers, neither of which were conclusive. But I remember the guy, Dr. McDonald Critchley, who had this amazing library and office on Harley Street, and he was a neuro something or other. Yep. And I remember sitting with him and going through all these tests, and I had a great time. And actually, there's something else that my laughter at the beginning is partly fueled because of that. I learned then in serious situations, humor and laughter is a great thing. And that transfers to my style these days in business and work and everything I do. I am quite a serious person, but I try and inject a bit of sarcasm or humor, or happy to take the mick out of myself and others, and that sort of two-way street, which Harv, you and I have had plenty of over the 18 months, 2 years.
And it's interesting, right? Sitting down, when I interview people, generally they are nervous before we start, right? And
well, a bit of that too.
Right, and so how it shows up with you is in laughter.
Yeah.
Right, so I've never seen that before. And anybody I have interviewed before, nobody started like that before.
Huh. Well, yeah, so it was probably nervous energy. Well, definitely nervous energy. But also it's trying to, when you smile, better things happen. And that was ingrained probably by those early years of MacDonald Critchley and then Jennifer Aston, another child psychologist, Philomena Ott, all sorts of people that were deemed very serious, but they created an environment for people to relax, and that was always through laughter or humor and just playing. And going back to that diagnosis of within school, I was removed from a lot of mainstream classes to have extra English. The first 2 years of which I had a specialist dyslexic teacher, Mrs. Ott, and her wee dog Boots, who was a tiny little dog that lived in a boot, as you do. But after that, no one knew how to deal with a dyslexic, or what. I still struggle spelling it. I think we all do. And so moving schools a couple of times, the schools were great because they were so free and looked at the individual, which again was probably unusual back then. Ironically, that very first school was purgatory for me, but they had the best resources for someone like me. So it was kind of a weird double-edged sword. But going back to that drive for clarity and simplicity of, I didn't know that until many, many years later, probably only 10, 15 years ago, that whenever I showed up with a voice, I was an arrogant twat, excuse my French. I thought I knew I was very boisterous. Because
Which is a bad word, arrogant or twat, or both of them?
Well, there's a question. Maybe that's the next podcast.
Yeah, it could be.
Finding my voice or not being heard at all, because I thought, oh, how come I can have all these thoughts? Everyone else must have them. People had only told me what I was like, not what everyone else was like. And it was only into my sort of early 30s, I had a particular mentor, Alan Dick, who's a fabulous guy, still very much around, but he gave me the confidence to stand in front of groups of people and facilitate and lead them and talk to them and help them solve problems in a pseudo-structured way. They applied a structure and then I changed it into what I thought was better. I have in the past thrown the baby out with the bathwater with some of the great theories. As I've got older, I've realized, some of those theories are pretty cool. And so through that time, trying to find my voice and realizing, hang on a minute, people haven't seen all these things that I've seen. And whether that's in just day-to-day life with friends, particularly in work, all those seemingly stupid questions no one's prepared to ask, but having spent a lifetime to then being misunderstood, I ask them. And people say, but aren't you frightened? I said, well, yeah, I am. But because of internally, I know I'm so used to failing and bouncing back, it's a piece of cake. And
MIQ, brother, I was just thinking, MIQ, you looked at that, because I just immediately, the number of people that didn't make it through there.
Yeah.
But you just saw it as just another maze.
It's just another problem. Let's solve it. Let's find a way. It's like Nats and I moving, deciding this and happening. Okay, we were expecting it to take 12 to 18 months. It happened in less, and visa returned in 3 days. But that was about a foundation, and actually a great example of a pyramid I use. It's 4 stages, the foundation of which is common understanding. You spend 80% of your time, no matter what you do in your world, in work, in life, anything, you spend so much time on common understanding, so you are of the same point of view. You don't have to agree. It's not about agreement. And then everything else happens because you get common understanding. Then you can go, okay, so what are the possibilities? Now we all understand the same thing. So all these possibilities come out, and then you can select those to plan it and do it.
So common understanding is not common agreement, right? There's a difference.
Yeah.
Common understanding. Yeah, okay. I've never heard of that pyramid before, but it's sort of, which Maori use a lot through whakawhanaungatanga and all that sort of carry on, is just actually, who the fuck are you, who the fuck am I, and all those bits, and let's work on that before we go on to the next stage.
Yeah, You spend 80% of your time there. Everything else is so easy. And actually, you've just hit on something, having sort of dived headlong into Maori culture within business and the Tiratia Waitangi and trying to get my head around that. I was so frustrated. So I thought, this is really simple. This is like obvious. Why aren't we all doing this anyway? And I hope that doesn't come across as belittling what is an important document for New Zealand. But there is a but. It's like, guys, we needn't make this such a big deal because this is actually about doing things with the right moral compass. Now, all our compasses are slightly different, but that's included. So why do we have the sort of equity, the options, the active retention, the partnerships? All this is like all human beings. Let's talk about it and figure it out and find a mutually beneficial way of doing it. Oh, I think that's in the treaty, that phrase. But that seems common sense to me. And it was while I was studying and I had a tutor, and bless her. And I think, Harv, you received a bit of my cannon fire during this. And it was like, come on. But actually, it comes back to that pyramid of spend the time. And it seems like a painfully long time sometimes to establish a common understanding from where everyone's point of view. Within that, you've got to engender conflict, but try and have an ideological conflict of saying, look, we're coming at this with different opinions, different points of view. We don't agree, but let's see if there is a common understanding. Let's see if there is a better way that we can move forward on. But equally, if there isn't, that's fine too. Then that's not going to be right. It's not going to work for you. There's no point in forcing it. So if you can establish that, then the world becomes a lot simpler place. And I think it would be, from my naive interpretation and limited time studying things like the treaty and engendering cultural differences within New Zealand, is it seems enforced into government and not clear outside of government what we should actually do. There seems quite a bit of ambiguity. I think within public sector, it's been engaged and engendered very well. And you can kind of see the rubber band of experience, people getting a little bit of knowledge and racing off the far end and then sort of bouncing back, like me, being frustrated. And then as the rubber band finds its kind of settlement, then it becomes honest, sincere, and ingrained. But I think this rubber band's still going all over the place.
Yeah. And it's, in the public sector, they've had to embrace the treaty. It's not an option not to. Not in all public sectors, but most.
Yeah.
And in the private sector, there are people out there now still not sure, and are hoping it's going to go away.
Yeah.
Right? Literally, just like it's a fad, and we'll get on, we don't have to deal with it. And all that's going to happen is they're just going to die and it's going to keep on going. But I'm fascinated that you've picked that up because I met you 18 months ago?
About 18 months ago.
And you have changed so much in that time. In that 18 months ago, you were like a foreigner to the country, right? You were this new POM that had come here and were like, what's all this, where do I fit in? And very quickly, you're not only fitting in, but you're working out what this culture of New Zealand is about, right? So I've
the rest of us.
Yeah, but you've done it very, very quickly, very, very quickly. Yeah.
Okay, I'll take that.
And just talking about with the Treaty of Waitangi and so forth, right? This is new, very new to you.
Yeah.
12 months ago, we weren't talking about this.
I couldn't even spell it.
Right.
Don't ask me to. But.
Yeah. And so now, very quickly, you've worked, a bit like MIQ, you've worked at this, you're starting to work this thing out.
Yeah.
So tell me about, there must have been, dyslexia, they talk about the new superpower and so forth, but, you're a different generation to me, but when for my generation there was no such thing as
Just younger, just for clarity.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We didn't need to say that. But dyslexia, for my generation, there was no such thing as dyslexia.
Yeah.
You were just a dumb fuck. Right?
Yeah.
And you couldn't spell and all that sort of
Yeah.
stuff. And you might show up in later years. So I'm thinking about somebody of my age who was dyslexic, was a engineer, but he couldn't use the tape measure and stuff like that, right? But he could, and then became just a stunning artist,
Yeah.
but cannot read or write.
Yeah.
Cannot read or write. His speech is really poor, and had a lot of trouble with gangs and all that sort of. And now is a stunning artist. You know, it's fascinating to see him, and I think all those wasted years coming through.
Yeah.
So your generation, younger generation, was still within a very new thing.
Yeah. It was pretty. I don't know whether it's new. Yes.
Trying to navigate.
I think it's. I'm not quite sure how to describe it, and it's only partly because I was going through it. You did feel, you're one of them, abandoned, but then for some people it was a good label or an excuse. I remember conversations with my headmaster at my prep school, a guy called Inky, and I used to Skype lessons all the time. Even my extra English lessons, I managed to kind of wheedle out of those. Say, oh no, I need to go and do this, and I had some very understanding teachers. And Inky always used to find me at the climbing wall, and I was 8, 9 years old. It was a very rudimentary climbing wall, bricks in the back of the sports centre. Never once did he tell me to go back to class or tell me off. He used to come and have a chat, and then he'd go, and then I'd carry on, and then it'd be whatever. And I think that was really important because he didn't try and enforce something that wasn't right. And one of the things that I have observed in my peers, and there's a few of my generation that I know are dyslexic, some of the bloody geniuses, and you're thinking, how does that work? But then when you start talking dyslexic to dyslexic or neurodiverse to neurodiverse and that whole quagmire of stuff within neurodiversity, man, you have some really cool conversations and ideas and the motivation. And one of the commonalities, and this isn't scientific, it's an observation of me and my effect on others and others on me within that neurodiverse world, is we all get knackered really quickly. And the amount of idea generation that generally goes on is enormous. And it's seen as like the lazy kid staring out the window all the time. That's because we're just piecing stuff together. And a piece of that being misunderstood is, again, this is a gross generalization of most dyslexics. No, I am visual rather. As a dyslexic, I am visually led. And so there isn't a picture for don't or not. So I don't for years I didn't understand it. So, okay, I crossed that bit out because I can't associate a picture to it. That then leads to trouble. And maybe there's something that within our society that isn't about accommodating that, but it's when you come from a minority point of view, you're always trying to be accepted by the majority. And so you're going a long way to be accepted by that, but it also comes back. And there doesn't feel as there's, okay, so how can you be explicit in what you're asking? And I suppose that comes back full circle to that clarity and simplicity. What does that actually mean? When you say don't touch the fire, all I'm hearing is fire. And this is in common language. We know that positive affirmation, all these sorts of things. But if we then start to think and feel in pictures and feelings, when people describe something as a feeling to me, I get it way better than just logic. The logic to me is important, but it's not very enduring. It doesn't engage you in the same way. And again, that manifests itself in the way I work. I can logically come up with stuff, but then you have to spend the time coming back to that common understanding. How does that actually make you feel? When you go to what is success, like, oh, well, it's bing, bash, bosh, and that's the success. So how do you feel when you're there? And that's the bit that creates engagement. And that's the thing that, ironically, is really hard to articulate. It's not very clear, and it's definitely not simple. But once the individual knows that, then that clarity and simplicity comes through. And in dyslexia, those pictures and that description and Inky not telling you off, giving you that freedom to actually gaze. For me, one of the reasons why I get tired is I have so many ideas, and for so long, I didn't know how to figure out which was the good idea out of all those ideas. I still don't. You mentioned earlier sort of coming through the puzzle of New Zealand very quickly. And that's slightly biased to my team, my CQ team. They've thrown rocks at me and helped me through that. So they're part of that journey, which is important to mention them. And all that mix. So when you come back to the dyslexics talking and everything else, it's 45 minutes, 2 hours of amazingness, and then we all go for a sleep.
Right.
So don't dismiss anyone for having a snooze. There are millions of reasons for that. Often it's because they've exhausted from brain power. And when you have 10 times the amount of ideas per idea as someone that I, as a dyslexic, typically have, it's exhausting. So,
and there's a direct correlation. I heard a wonderful podcast recently talking about ideas, and they said if your company needs more ideas, if you're looking for good ideas, have more of them.
yeah.
And they said there's a direct correlation between the number of ideas and the quality of ideas.
Yeah.
And they did a test with photography, and they said, right, we're going to pay you X amount for reaching out this standard. We're going to pay you this amount of money, right? And so if you hit this level, then you get. And there was a couple of hundred photographers. Hit this level, we'll pay you this much. If you produce 150 photographs, we'll pay you this amount of money. And the people who won the prize for the best photos were also the same ones that produced the most photos.
Right.
Because tied up in that 150 plus photos were the good ones.
Yeah.
And they said a direct correlation and they said it's the same with ideas that, and I think, one of the things for me, Ian, I have lots of ideas and I like dumping them on people, which can be really exhausting.
Yeah.
And,
For their menu.
Yeah, right. But there is definitely a correlation that somewhere sifting through with others, I go, or we'll try that on and then modify. Yeah. So why? Because I'm just thinking with your journey, this could have gone very badly for you through your life.
Yeah.
If you, there must have been moments in your life where you could have gone this way or this way.
Yeah, sure.
Right. So tell us about what that's like.
Which bit?
Well, because you wouldn't have always picked the best route. I'm guessing.
Probably not. I think the ability to change it in a heartbeat. I've always had that, and on a personal and organisational level. I don't get why people find it so difficult. I really don't. I'm like, hang on a minute. But that comes back to motive, and that's emotional, not logical. And if you think, I was told, I can't remember who told me this, a thing called urban and lurban. So urban is the emotional reason for buying, and lurban is the logical reason for buying. I'm struggling to remember who I first heard this from. It's not mine. But you need both. But if you primarily have just logical buy-in, it typically is difficult to achieve. It's only when the emotional buy-in too becomes kind of seamless, easy. And if you think about, and actually there's a funny little story. My first experience of this, I must have been about 3 or 4, and this story was remembered back to me by Toby, my godmother's son, who's 15 years older than me. And we were in the Scottish Highlands, and I wanted to go up the hill with the big boys. We were out hunting or something, I can't remember. It was also the same trip. I caught a salmon, and my sister wanted to beat me, so she caught the next day a smoked salmon, which was quite interesting. But anyway, I had these tiny little red boots, like gum boots. And I wanted to follow Toby and his
You were how
friends.
old?
I must have been 3 or 4, maybe 5. Okay. I was really, really little. And we used to go to this tiny little hut, bothy, we call them in Scotland, a lot. And we'd shoot cowpats and go fishing and little dens and camps. And anyway, one of the creeks, there's tiny little burns. And it must have been only the sort of width of your hand wide. But at 4 or 5, whatever age I was, it was huge. So Toby built me a bridge out of grass. And I was looking at this torrent of raging water. This was only like 3 inches wide, going, oh my God. My brain was saying no, but my heart was saying go. And what did I do? I managed to jump the entirety of the 3-inch torrent. And that's kind of an illustration of what I mean between the logical and the emotional buy-in to achieve something or do something, to change something. And when you have both, it becomes incredibly powerful. There is an argument from Iain's world of thinking that if you have just the emotional, then stuff happens and it sticks. And going back to the question about that sort of making the right decisions or not, I'm typically heart-led, I suppose is what we'd call it, but heart and gut. And I left school at 15 3/4, and back then it was important. And got a job with an outdoor centre, John Ridgway School of Adventure, who the way I got that job was I'd written to all the outdoor centres for some work after my GCSEs, the sort of exams you do at sort of 15, 16 years old. So kind of a real landmark in terms of formal education. And everyone said no, and John Ridgway said no 4 times. So I phoned him, which he finally said yes. And only because I was so persistent. And I just wanted to work for him. Man, this guy was one of the first guys with Shea Blythe to row across the Atlantic. He was former Special Forces, amazing fella. And he then basically put me in charge of the businessman courses at barely 16. And interestingly, that was, on reflection, that was probably my first leadership role in the very old school team building. I came from a school that was the same founder of my school founded things like Outward Bound, a guy called Kurt Hahn. So, and I was passionate about mountaineering, climbing. I spent all my class time as well as free time climbing, doing those sorts of things. But so after that, I was told that I wouldn't get any GCSEs, so I'd have to resit years while I was at work at John Ridgway's place. I passed. I got 5 that required, you needed 5 or more of these exams at grade C or above to get into 6th form. So great. And I was going back to school 4 or 5 days early, and a mate of mine, Matt Hollingworth, he was coming back to hang out with me to do all the things you weren't supposed to be doing when you're at that age at school until school started. And when I arrived back, they said, oh, we got it wrong. You only got 4.
Oh.
You can imagine how that felt.
Yeah.
And then immediately I said, that's it, bugger you, I'm off. And partly because of my experience with being in the mountains with these businessmen, but also younger kids. There was a kind of adventure school, kids would come on as well as the businessmen. And I thought, man, schools are kind of grown out of that pretty quickly, and fought pretty hard to leave. 3 weeks later, I'd left school, got a job. And then it kind of went from there. And I think that was quite a profound moment. And at the time I was like, so what? I don't care. And frankly, quite arrogant about it, thinking, who needs that? And it would have been a lot easier. My life would have been a lot more straightforward had I stayed in formal education, I think.
Just so when you said the effect I had when they said, we've got it wrong, you only got 4, I couldn't believe what went off inside of me at that point. Yeah.
What was that?
It was like, well, fuck you.
Yeah.
I would have turned around and walked out.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. I had such a reaction to that.
it. If you think about the component parts of what was going on there, so before that, I was going to get none. Then all of a sudden, I got 5, and these are from people that you respect hugely.
Yep.
Your teachers,
Yep.
the heads of school, and everything else. And then they come back and say we got it wrong. There is an irony in that, and actually going back to a guy Inky earlier, the primary school headmaster, he showed me that he could turn the impossible into the possible twice when I was a tiny kid. About what school I was going to go to, a special needs school, ended up going to a mainstream school. That's a whole big another story. But that kind of, though it was a negative event to me, it also showed me that, well, people do screw up. That's okay. And I was quite flippant about it. And I'm not sure whether it was the fuck you reaction. It kind of was the straw that broke the camel's back. No, that's wrong. It was just a small catalyst thinking what I wanted to do anyway.
Yeah.
I didn't kind of want to do 2 more years at school. I wanted to be a mountain guide.
Yeah.
That was it. And so I spent 3 or 4 weeks crafting my strategy to leave. And my tutor Colin Sangs and John Hall was a teacher but responsible for mountain rescue and climbing, so I was very close to those two. My housemaster and a new headmaster. And Colin and John, I thought were going to support me, and they did, but professionally they couldn't. Ben Goss, my housemaster, was hell-bent against me leaving. Mark Piper, the headmaster, who didn't really know me at all, he was like 3 weeks into the job, was hell-bent against me leaving. My dad was like, you dare. My mum was, don't, but I kind of knew I'd have her support. But Colin and John had warned Ben Goss and Mark Poe, look, Ian's been canvassing, figuring all this out, how he's going to leave. You better be prepared. Frankly, they weren't. From my rose-tinted memory of this meeting in the headmaster's house, was very much around, their questions were just so empty. And one particular one, I won't call these people out because all 4 of them are still alive. But it came back and said, oh, well, no one's going to hire you without a degree.
Yep.
I could list off every outdoor centre owner that didn't have a degree. Like, guys, come on, wake up. And all these sort of questions, there was no...
And the irony is, you've just got a degree, haven't you?
Yeah, apparently so. Yeah, 33 whatever years later.
There you go. Because I saw that online the other day, that you now have a degree.
Yeah. Hasn't changed me, I don't think.
No.
Don't tell the assessors and my tutor.
And you still can't get a job, but that's okay.
Yeah, but hey, shit happens, right? Maybe we'll come back to the degree later. But it was that conversation and that emotional reason, right, I'm going to go and do this. I'm going to find a way. And I left. Another sort of big moment that builds resilience. My housemaster had promised me that he would take me to the station to get on the train to go home, and he never turned up. Never asked him why, actually. I've seen him since a few times. And a good guy. I respect him in different ways. He was a great housemaster as far as I was concerned, but I've never understood why he didn't turn up to take me to the station. And he was nowhere to be found. So Jimmy, of course, and this is in the middle of nowhere in Scotland, who ran Jimmy's taxis, saved the day, got me to the station, off I went. And got home and then thought, oh, bugger. My strategy was only about leaving. It wasn't what I was going to do after leaving. So, just got a job. And then, travelled, really. So,
and what through your career, Ian, and I'm just mindful that our time this morning is short because of me sleeping in this morning. Missed my alarm. I apologise for that. What are the key things that have shaped you? What are the key things that have shaped you through your career to really hone this clarity and simplicity thing?
Trial and error, a lot of it. I've gone from consulting into operational business, back into consulting, operation. And I wish I could say that was by design. It was in part because when I was consulting and typically in organizational development, leadership type stuff, a little bit of advice, a little bit of strategy, I felt a bit of a fraud having not done it. And there's some key people that were in my life, and it goes back to Inky, my headmaster as a kid. Some of the staff at Gornston and the Freda, that was my high school, and some of the key staff there. My first boss, Wendy, giving me the freedom to kind of explore and discover, and gave me the patience to listen and help me figure out some of my thoughts. And then it was a bit later, my first real mentor, Alan Dick, he gave me the confidence to stand up. He helped me find my voice and said, look, I don't know whether he actually said you have some useful things to say. And he's now talking to me in my ear going, no, I definitely didn't say that. But he gave me that confidence and that what we call psychological safety now, I suppose, of it's okay, he's got my back. And then actually after Alan, immediately after leaving that organisation, Claire, the managing director and my direct boss, she said a number of things, one of which was never write an email to me again. And I was like, oh, okay. And this was old BlackBerry days, and well, it wasn't that long ago, 2005-ish. And she said, write down how you would explain it to me. And that was transformational for me, because I would try and write, and I'd try and do all the grammar and the commas and everything else. And then it took a lot of tripping up, falling over, grazing my chin. But as I started to write down how I would write it, explain it to someone verbally, it was automatically punctuated anyway. And that transformed that. And the other thing two other things actually Claire said to me, she said, change I to we. And that was transformational. And don't underestimate how much people will follow my lead and down to my conviction. But she did caveat that with check in on your conviction sometimes.
Right.
So I think back then I could very much be a bull in a china shop. And that comes, I get very frustrated with people that say I can't or I don't or, oh, it's impossible. It's like, no, you just haven't tried finding the right idea. You haven't tried enough to find the right idea. And I don't mean that everything's possible. I believe most things are impossible if you put your heart and mind to it.
Look, it's interesting. I had this recently. I was having a bit of a down day, and I was talking to a mate, Rod McDonald, who sponsors this podcast. And Rod said, mate, there's always a solution.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was just going, it sort of pissed me off a little bit. It was just like, you know, I would have liked some empathy or something. But he was just like, there's always a solution.
Yeah.
And, you know, that stuck with me. That just got under my skin. And it's really interesting how that simple little thing has been one of the most influential things said to me for years.
Yeah.
There's always a solution.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I don't know why it's taken so long for that one to really get, you know.
Doesn't matter. You've now got it. I have immediately above my sort of workstation in my study at home, handwritten, and it says, "The treasure is out there. It is worth it. We will find it." And it's that treasure, whatever that treasure is, and that I've shared. Have I never shared you that picture? Yeah, I might have. Yeah,
You have. You showed it to me on a Zoom call.
Yeah, and it's something that I don't look at every day. I know where it is. It's one of the few things that I don't move around. I move stuff around on pinboards all the time, so I don't get blind to them always. That's the one thing that I know exactly where it is. And there's another thing actually written next to it, which I can't recite, but it's about changing assumptions. So if we've got a problem or whatever, what happens when we change our assumption of that problem? Does the problem change? Does some of our solutions change because we've changed our assumption and those sorts of things? Stuff like that, I think, is really important. All that actually then comes back into that common understanding bit of that 4-stage pyramid.
So when we first met, we were introduced via Mindy, which was
Yeah.
cool.
Thank you, Mindy.
And the and I was talking to you online, and I'm going, oh, what if this guy sounds really interesting? I wonder if he's actually got his shit together or not. And so I connected you with Rich Alderton,
Yeah.
who I trust immensely, who lives in Cambridge
Yeah.
as a member, and I did that to cross-reference.
Right.
And so then, after a wee while, I went back to Rich and said, so this guy, Iain Menmuir, is he the shit? Has he got his, And he went, no, mate, he said he knows his stuff. And it was around, and because I knew we are similar in some ways, and I thought I wanted to get another opinion, so I didn't just go down the track blindly going, I think this guy's cool. And
Rich and I talk every
I do.
2 months or so. And
I do.
I might meet him in a week or two.
I keep checking to make sure that, right? So but it
Like
was
you're a
really
right snooper.
Yeah, I am. But I was really interested because I thought I didn't want to be seduced by this new thing.
Yeah.
And I wanted to cross-reference.
Quite
that.
wise.
And I do that a lot because I just want to I don't do it with people that I trust, and I trust Rich immensely.
Yeah.
And it was because a lot of the stuff you were talking about with your dyslexia. So I was born with hearing loss.
Yeah.
Different journey, but some very school was a disaster.
Yeah.
When you cannot hear in a classroom, you learn very, very little, and your behaviour gets quite disruptive and all that sort of stuff, right? So, so I was just a dumb kid, and then they found out when I was 10 I was deaf, and so then I'm deaf and dumb. But, a lot too. And it's interesting listening to you talk about key people from your childhood.
Yeah.
So you've done that more than I've heard from other people as well.
Well, partly through my degree, I reflected back. I've done a lot of reflection at either events or periods of time in isolation, and part of my degree was actually knitting all that together, and it was like, holy schmo, actually that some of the stuff I do, and my parents actually play a relatively small part in that, but there are influences later on from my father, but earlier on from my mother, that feed into the Inkies and the John Halls and the Allens and the Clares of this that I've mentioned. There are a whole bunch of others that are awesome people, and I'm honoured to have spent some time with some of these amazing people. And
it's interesting you talk about Inky, and sorry for jumping in there,
Yeah,
but
that's right.
because the thing is, for me, it was Elizabeth Redmayne was my speech and, as it turned out, drama teacher.
Right.
And she had this flaming red hair, and she had tattooed invisibly on her forehead, "Do not fuck with me." And it was the first teacher that I actually paid attention to. And I would go and see her once a week, and I had to learn Beatrice Potter on all the sort of poetry and so forth. And then she took me to competitions to get up and do this poetry.
Oh, cool.
And well, it was terrifying because all the other kids were there to compete.
Yeah.
I wasn't there to compete. I was there just to get me up on stage and mumble this shit because I didn't talk to, do that. And so she made me do this.
That's pretty extreme.
And
Get up there. Recite.
And I was so terrified of her.
I bet you were.
And I was more scared of her to get up. And so, but without her, my life would have been vastly different.
Yeah.
Vastly different. And then, and I had the pleasure of thanking her maybe 10 years ago.
Oh, cool.
And it was an event, and I singled her out, and I said, and I said, "You won't remember me?" She said, "Yes, I remember you." And I just, and I was just, thank you so much for that. And then there was one teacher at school, Grant Harper, who tried to tell me I wasn't dumb.
Right.
And that was a really hard thing to hear, because when you're dumb, you've got all the excuses under the world. And so to take that away from me,
I never thought of it like that.
it was just like, and then I got 65% in he taught English.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was because there was a test or an exam, and it had stuff you had to interpret,
Right.
cartoons.
Yeah.
Monstered it. And it was Snoopy and different things.
Yeah.
What is this? And I'd go, I know what that means.
Yeah.
You know? But all the other shit, Shakespeare and all that sort of stuff, was just like,
Did you have to do Latin?
no, fuck no.
Oh, jeez, oh.
Mate,
I
I refused to do French. I refused to do French.
Oh, sacre bleu.
And I was just like...
That's an English word in French.
Yeah. So, Ian, what...
Yeah.
And look, podcasts are normally 90 minutes, and
Yeah.
this one, unfortunately, today is only 60, so which gives us another 10 minutes. And I am gutted about this because I've been really looking forward to this, expanding this, but you have been incredibly succinct as well, so thank you for that. In this last 10 minutes, what do you need to cover?
Oh, blimey. What would you like us to cover?
Okay, so I'm interested. You've got into this space, and this is where you and I are working together, and I'm really thankful for that.
Yeah, I'm really excited.
We're
going to do some really cool shit. Really cool.
We are. And
Watch this space, everyone.
And having your skills mixed in with our methodology, this is what we're going to talk about. Tell me, what do you think we can achieve mixing the collective intelligence methodology of making sense of complexity? And I'm learning a bit more about this from Lisa Markwick at the moment.
I was going to call out Lisa and Richard, who and I and Michelle, and we're trying to keep you out of the melee.
They are.
We've been
They are.
meeting, doing a lot of discovery, I suppose, is the best way to do it, what we're going to do, what it looks internally and externally, and is it actually worth it, all that sort of stuff.
So let's talk about that. And this is, to put it concisely, this is about this thing called impact teams that I tried a couple of years ago. We've run it 3 times and in different ways. And this is taking our methodology into the consulting space, but not consulting.
Yeah.
Tell me what you think we can achieve with this.
God, what we can achieve with it, it's finding new treasure, taking the treasures out there, philosophy, or finding a better way. I think that perhaps describing, and this is quite loosely describing what we envisage the impact teams to be. It's a small, specific, but very diverse group of people, and that diverse piece can be wherever your imagination takes you. And it does depend on that initial inquiry with the client. Do they actually know what challenge? And that might be the challenge of growth, expansion, or it might be resolving problems, or do they actually really know what the problem is, or challenge, and what's behind that one, and what's behind the next. That's really, and on the 3rd or 4th iteration, you might find that. And once we've got hold of that thing or things the client needs us to help them with, it's then this diverse group of people working specifically on that from all different points of view. So whether that's in the neurodiverse world, having a dyslexic, autistic, dyspraxic, blah, 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 all that myriad of people, then I was given the phrase of neuronormal by a neuronormal person the other day, and he says, I want to be like you. Partly because I think I just overwhelmed him with ideas. Poor guy. But it's taking all that together. So it's part of it, and it's nuance. So a lot of the questions we might ask, anyone can come up with, anyone can ask, but when you ask the question, it's having the patience and the discipline to let that, I was going to say fester, mull.
Percolate.
Good word. Percolate. And there needs to be a defined period of time, but that's where you build the rigor, and where, okay, that's where I've got right now. And then you reflect back on it a day later or an hour later or whatever, going, oh, what about this? And creating that space and patience to allow that to happen. And that might be multiple iterations. And it's not about going in doing the work for someone. The organisations, we can help them get clarity and simplify the narrative that they need to get this done, and they can do it internally. Excuse me. And I think that's the spin on a traditional consultancy model, and it's the reason why it resonated with me from our first conversation. It's kind of like, well, doesn't everyone work like that?
Yeah.
Coming from me, I'm like, no, I can't do this for you.
Yeah.
I'm not you. I don't want it the same way as you.
Yeah.
I can only logically connect the same way as you.
Yeah.
I need to help you find the emotional connect, that urban and lurban. One of the things that, with the right courage and commitment from the client on what could be an uncomfortable ride, and us as a team, so myself, Lisa, Richard, whoever comprises the impact team and our different roles within that, how we support those people through this journey will be really, really important. Because I suspect, and I know from the sort of pseudo situations that I envisage that I've been in similarly, the amount of informal counselling, support, encouragement, but also calling out that's required is indeterminate at this point in time. It does depend. But the phrase Michelle, Richard, Lisa and I come back to quite a lot is nuance. It's taking what is an ordinary question and interrogating that question in different ways. And actually, I look at the group of the four of us, we all come at it from different ways. I think I'm just trying to think what they'd say about me. Probably the impatient one. Right, we need to get moving.
You definitely are.
Oh, let me just think about it. Right. And I think Richard has a very good structure. Lisa has very sage observation about things, and Michelle catches everything for us.
And she wants it organised in a way that it can work.
Yeah. And it's an interesting that our last discussion as a collective was, we now need to, and actually which has led us to today and what happens in the next half an hour or so, is we've got to the impasse of we need to speak to the client. We need to get that starting to go, because we've worked enough on what it might look like in our theoretical processes. And I sense that one of the members of that group is like, oh no, I need to get it perfect. And it's saying, no, we'll never get perfect. That's a waste of all of our time. We need to be prepared to trip up.
Yep.
And screw up and recover. And the term that I use is we need to go tap dancing first.
Yep.
And through this process, every single one will be a new dance.
Yep.
But I think that's a nice metaphor to say what an impact team does. What's important to say is we're not going to come and do the work for you. We're going to help you get...
Or come in with the answers.
Yeah, we're going to help you get clarity on exactly what it is and try and simplify that. Because if you can sum all that up with all the emotional and logical rigor behind it in that 7 plus or minus 2 words, and you can communicate that in simple, then everyone's, oh, right, got it, right. And guess what? That's called common understanding. And then boom, everything happens. And it is so cool when that shit happens.
Going back to your pro mode.
Yeah.
And look, it's interesting. I know you guys have met for maybe 3, 4, 5 meetings. It was the first meeting that Michelle came out when she was happy. First one.
Okay.
And at that point I went, okay, so the team's ready to go.
Tell me more. What
well, Michelle likes, she's very good at marshalling all the bits and pieces together. And it was the first meeting she came out and was like, that was a great meeting. And it was like, and not being involved in it, which I know with Michelle means that everybody is starting to get on the same page now.
Yeah.
So the fog is clearing, and we're and it's like, cool, time to actually start moving forward.
Well, I think one of the important things to highlight, one of the reasons behind that is perhaps, and I've then had this with another CQ member, I didn't know Richard or Lisa at all. I'd had comms about billing with Michelle. That was it. Is one of the special things about our personal and professional development teams is vulnerability and trust are a matter of course. And because we all have that experience, it was kind of like, they're just another CQ member. We can say what the hell I like without offending each other, which is the nuance of CQ. Without it, it's tricky to make good things happen. It's not to say they can't, but when you have high levels of trust and high levels of vulnerability in an environment where, I've belly laughed uncontrollably and blubbed, crying uncontrollably within an hour in my team meetings. That's the type of environment where special stuff happens. And when you then get a working group to work on something else together, you just imagine what good stuff can come out of that.
And Iain, we're going to finish there because of time, but apologies for being late this morning.
Hey, no drama.
And I'm really looking forward to working with you and the rest
Likewise.
of the team
Yeah.
on this impact team stuff. And what I feel really excited by is that I'm not the one doing the work because it's not something I'm good at.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of opening doors for the impact teams to come in and do. And I think, we know that collective intelligence curates diverse teams so people or organisations can get clarity and make sense of complexity so they can take action with wisdom. That's our shit. That's what we do. And this next stage of taking out, and we'll continue with our teams developing the people because they are so important for us to do this work going forward. So, Iain, thank you.
Thank you, Hov. It's been a pleasure.
Let's go and do some shit together.
Yep. In about 15 minutes.
Thanks for listening in. We're Collective Intelligence, a one-of-a-kind people ecosystem that takes inspiration from Mother Nature. To find out how we reimagine leadership development, visit our website www.collectiveintelligence.co.nz.